just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore. You won't have to vote anymore. You won't have to vote anymore. Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol. And we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
They say that Donald Trump is an adjudicated insurrectionist. Indeed, 3 times over, they urge that he has been found to have engaged in insurrection. And frankly, I think they're right on that score. First of all, we all know that a Colorado court, after a trial on the merits, a trial at which Donald Trump was represented, that Colorado court found, as a matter of fact and law, Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. The Colorado Supreme Court affirmed that ruling, meaning they agreed with it and pronounced Donald Trump had engaged in insurrection. That went up to the Supreme Court. Now, interestingly, the Supreme Court did not disavow or negate or disagree with the Colorado courts, plural, courts that found he engaged in insurrection. They said, well, okay, but the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, Section 3, says that if somebody takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution and thereafter engages in insurrection, as Donald Trump seems to have done, he cannot hold office, federal, state, or local, unless Congress votes to remove the disqualification, and it takes a 2/3 vote of both the House and the Senate. The Supreme Court said, okay, even acknowledging all of that, elsewhere in the 14th Amendment, it says, and I quote, Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article of the 14th Amendment. So Congress has the power to do it. Here's what the Supreme Court did, and this is the part that so many of us find offensive to the Constitution and to common sense. The Supreme Court said, well, we're going to decide an issue that is not before us in this case. We're going to say Congress must pass a law, must pass legislation disqualifying an insurrectionist. That is actually absurd for a few reasons. One, first and foremost, the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment
I would assume it would just be self-executing. It's in the Constitution. Why do you have to pass legislation upholding what the Constitution already says?
It is self-executing and self-evident. Indeed, it's obvious to anybody with a 3rd grade understanding of the English language. It says, take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, engage in insurrection or give aid and comfort thereto. You may not hold office. You cannot hold office unless Congress votes to remove the disqualification. The Supreme Court made up, out of whole cloth and contrary to Section 3's express language, the very text of the Constitution, made up that Congress has to pass some legislation further laying all of this stuff out. Here is the main problem with that ruling from the Supreme Court. One, it's actually not a ruling. It is something we call dicta. Dicta is non-binding ramblings and ruminations of Supreme Court justices. Why do I say it's dicta and it's not the ruling? Because, first of all, there is a bedrock principle in the practice of law, and the Supreme Court, among others, repeatedly has said, we do not issue advisory opinions. We only saw the legal wood, the very issue that is presented to us to be decided. And only after we've identified the issue, We've told the two opposing parties to brief that issue, and we've held oral arguments so both parties can be heard on that issue. Do we, the Supreme Court, decide that precise issue? We will decide no more because no other issues were briefed or argued, and any opinion we might offer would be merely an advisory opinion, and we're not in the business of offering advisory opinions. And yet, Brian, they tried to do just that by boxing Congress in and by disregarding the plain language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Here's why I say Donald Trump has been declared an insurrectionist 3 times over, and then we're going to move on to what the next logical and legal step ought to be, including according to the two authors of this new Hill piece. First of all, we already talked about the Colorado courts declaring Donald Trump an insurrectionist and the United States Supreme Court not disagreeing with it, not invalidating it, not knocking it down. So Donald Trump, as we sit here, remains an adjudicated insurrectionist. 2, remember Donald Trump's second impeachment? I know there were so many, we tend to lose track of all of the Donald Trump's impeachments. His second impeachment was on a single article. What was that article of impeachment? Incitement of insurrection.
The House of Representatives moving to impeach President Trump again
for high crimes and misdemeanors.
On Wednesday, members of the House debated an article of impeachment for incitement of insurrection to hold the president responsible for the attack on the U.S. Capitol 1 week ago.
The violence last Wednesday was abhorrent.
But North Carolina Republican Dan Bishop slammed the process as partisan and said he would vote no on impeachment.
I hold him accountable for the events that transpired.
Newly sworn in South Carolina Republican Nancy Mace strongly condemned the president, but also said the effort was too rushed to earn her support.
Poses great questions about the constitutionality of this process.
The impeachment vote comes exactly 1 week before President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. Some House members want President Trump out of office before that happens.
The House voted favorably and passed that article of impeachment by a vote of 232 to 197. So Congress found that he engaged in incitement of insurrection. Then it went over to the Senate for a trial, and a trial was held. Again, this is important, at which Donald Trump was represented by multiple lawyers. He had his say. He made his legal and factual arguments, and he lost. And you might say, well, wait a minute. He wasn't removed from office after the Senate trial. No, but he still lost. What was the vote by the Senate on whether or not Donald Trump engaged in incitement of insurrection and should be removed? 57 guilty,
43.
57 guilty, 43 not guilty.
Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters who he has deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stirred to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. For any who remain insistent on an audit in order to satisfy the many people who believe that the election was stolen, I'd offer this perspective. No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth.
In a very real and visceral sense, Donald Trump was found guilty by a bipartisan vote of the United States senators. 57 found him guilty of incitement of insurrection and said he should be removed, and 43 said no, he shouldn't be removed. Now, they didn't get to the requisite 67 votes to remove him, but make no mistake about it, by a healthy majority, they found him guilty of incitement of insurrection. That's the second thing we can point to show that, in fact, Congress announced that he was guilty of incitement of insurrection. The third is a little bit less firm, but I'm going to throw it in the mix anyway. It's the January 6th House Select Committee that presented evidence that we saw with our own damn eyes. And, anybody who took a realistic view of that evidence that was presented in the J6 public hearings concluded, as did the committee, that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. So what happens moving forward? Because we still have the Supreme Court issuing this advisory opinion that, we really need some congressional legislation. This is what it boils down to in the article, and I hope our viewers are sticking with us because that was a very long run-up to, I think, a more direct answer to the question. The article says the Electoral Count Act, which we all know will come into play on January 6th at the certification of the Electoral College votes. The Electoral Count Act says there are two reasons that, starting in the House of Representatives, which has the responsibility of certifying the vote, there are two reasons that members of Congress can actually vote against certifying the electoral votes. And here's how it reads, very briefly. The Act, the Electoral Count Act, specifies two grounds for objection to an electoral vote. One, if the electors from a state were not lawfully certified. We saw that happen the last go-round, but that doesn't seem to be in play. But number two does. Two, or if the vote of one or more electors was not, quote, regularly given. And the authors of the article say, a vote for a candidate disqualified by the Constitution, courtesy of the 14th Amendment, is plainly in accordance with the normal use of the words, not regularly given.
What's your thoughts? Please be respectful with your comments. Also, please click the like, click the notification bell, and subscribe to this channel.
Listen, Genesis chapter 11 verse 10 explains the genealogy of Shem. Shem was a black man in Africa. If you repeat this back, Genesis 14 verse 13, Abraham steps on the scene. Being a descendant of Shem, which is a fact, means Abraham too was Abraham, born in the city of a black man called Nimrod, grandson of Ham. Ham had 4 sons. One was named Canaan. Here, let me do some explaining. Abraham, Isaac was Jacob had 12 sons, for real, and these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10, these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10, these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10.